Welcome into Chicago Sports Overtime, where we've got Scott Merkin hanging out here with us from MLB.com, a longtime beat writer for the Chicago White Sox. Merk, you are down there in Arizona for spring training. Spring training, oftentimes, of course, signifying a new start, which I'm sure Sox and Sox fans are already hoping for. Set the scene for us. How's it going down there in Arizona?
Well, first off, it was 80 today, so I'm missing the Chicago weather. Not really.
I sense the sarcasm. Yeah.
It's a little bit. It's warmer than it usually it gets 80 like in March here, but they've already. So I'm afraid what March is going to be like. But very good vibes overall. You know, I mean, the Sox are very excited to have Will Venable in charge. Chris Getz is excited for the stuff that he's done over the last couple years since he took over the infrastructure building, the research and development, people he's hired in the front office, people he's hired on the staff. They're excited for the young players. They have 6 in our MLB pipeline top 100. So, it's a level of excitement, but, that's all well and good. You got to win games, obviously. And this may not be the year where they break through on that, but they feel like they're pointed in the right direction.
Well, the Sox are once again, of course, rebuilding, coming off a season that saw them lose that record-breaking 121 games. When you're talking to some of the players so far, how did they use this offseason to reflect?
I think they kind of, took it in stride. You could tell that, understandably, they got tired over the last week of answering, what's it mean to have 118? What's it mean to have 119, 120, 121? And Andrew Benintendi had a good line. Someone asked him if his, family talked to him a lot, and he said about that. And he said, I've been doing this long enough where they know what to ask and what not to ask. So I think they pretty much, they acknowledge it. They're not hiding from it. They know what happened. It was an awful season. The guys who are still here, which isn't a ton from last year's team, but, they're ready to move on. They're ready to I think they'd probably like to stop hearing the number 121 at this point. But, obviously you got to do something different to get that out of the system. And that's what's kind of out there now. They made history for the wrong way. And, I think they hope to certainly, would be, I think, very upset if they didn't improve on last year. I mean, even if you think about it, even if they go 61 and 101, it's a 20-game improvement, right, from last year. So they almost have to be better. And, I will say this, you don't want to make excuses because it was a bad team. There's no way around it. But they did have a lot of, weird situations. They had a lot of close losses. I don't think any stood out more than the game in September. I think it was the second game of a doubleheader, maybe against Texas, where Andrew Vaughn hit what should have been a walk-off home run and Travis Janikowski went over the fence, caught the ball, probably one of the best catches of the year. They end up losing, and the guy who suggested subbing Travis Janikowski in for defensive replacements in the 9th was Will Venable, who was then the associate manager, I think his title was, to Bruce Bochy, and now he, of course, is the manager of the White Sox. So, I think they know what happened last year. They're kind of over it and ready to focus on 25, and are focusing on 25, not just ready.
Let's talk about Will Venable. What has he established so far this early on in spring training?
I think communication. That's what you hear a lot about him, is that he's an easy guy to talk to. He knows what he wants. Drew Butera, who is the catching coordinator but served as bench coach during the end of last season after Pedro Grifol was removed. I always have trouble saying Grifol. But he's running camp. He's kind of outlined, he's running camp in terms of the schedule-wise. So it gives Will a chance to kind of move around different fields, talk to different people. And the players really like how, he's the quintessential kind of quote-unquote players manager. Now, again, it's we're 12 days into, not even that. I think it's just over a week. The 12th was the first day pitchers and catchers worked out. So you'll see more as the season progresses. But I think everyone likes how sharp he is. Everyone likes that, he's willing to. I talked to Mark Kotze, who's the A's manager, the other day at the Cactus League Media Day, who is a big influence on Will as a player. And he said that, he always wanted to get better. He always had questions, and he always had good questions. And he said those kind of guys are the ones you see gravitate to the job that Venable is. So, I'm sorry. I think it's just the communication right now. I think they really like what he's had to say to them and what they've discussed so far in the early parts of camp. And, even go back to Sox Fest Live when he was there with about, 20 players. I think even that kind of started the experience moving towards this year.
Mark, when you look at this roster, there are very few set jobs, so there's plenty of competition here. Let's start with the outfield. Feels like a bit of a crowded outfield here, as they've added guys like Michael Taylor, Austin Slater, Mike Tauchman, but specifically with Luis Robert Jr. Will he make it through spring training without getting traded?
I think he will. I think he will,
Okay.
but now that can change quickly. We thought, if you would have asked me if we would have done the same interview the first week in March last year about Dylan Cease, I would have said yes, and then he was traded 8 days later to San Diego. Now, I think, Chris Getz would do that again during spring training, but he's got to get the return that he wants. Luis
Mhm.
Robert is a great player. He's a five-tool talent. He is a Silver Slugger winner. He's a Gold Glove winner. He was an All-Star a couple years ago. He had one of the more complete seasons in White Sox history in 23, and then was hurt right out of the gate last year, was gone for 2 months, and then had, for anyone, but especially for him, a really rough season. And, I think there was interest. People know what he's about, but the Sox are not going to trade him just to trade him. They still have a, high sense of what he's worth. And if they don't get that, then they're going to keep him, and hopefully he plays well for the Sox. And who knows what goes from there. I mean, I don't see, he has a $20 million option for 26 and a $20 million option for 27 with a $2 million buyout on each year. I don't see the Sox picking up those options, but he's a great talent. He'd help any team. But again, the Sox are looking for, a couple headliners on that, and they obviously have not had that met yet. And then there's the whole money issue with the $15 million owed to him this year and the two options past that you got to figure out. So I would say, as we sit here right now on February 20th, when we're talking about this, is I think it's he stays with the Sox. He'll be the opening day center fielder.
So Chris Getz spent this offseason adding some veterans, one being Michael Taylor. Defense in center is his strong suit, but what does adding a guy like him really do for this team and this clubhouse?
Yeah, it's interesting because they have five outfielders with guaranteed money. Benintendi, Roberts, Tauchman, Slater, and and Taylor. You just mentioned Taylor, and I didn't remember. So those five guys, I would see, figure barring a trade are on this team. Taylor is a very good defensive player. He is good speed, and didn't hit very well last year, but they're hoping that he can bounce back. The Sox, have a lot of guys that Tauchman had a really nice year for the Cubs last year, but they're hoping they have a lot of guys they're hoping can bounce back in certain areas of whatever their game is. But I think one of the key things across the board that Chris Getz was looking for in these additions, Martin Perez or Joey Gallo, any of these guys they brought in, is good guys in the clubhouse, good influences on the younger player, and we've seen that so far. And I think that's one of the things with Michael Taylor. And again, if you need Robert, Robert, like many players outside of David Ortiz and Edgar Martinez, does not love DHing. We asked him about that early on because they said they really want to, protect his health. But if he is in a game where he's going to DH, you have a really good defensive center fielder to put out there in Michael Taylor. So, they've made some good additions, especially with the budget they're in, and we'll see how it all kind of plays out. But eventually you want to see the young guys. That's the whole goal of this year, right? The goal of really year full two of the rebuild is you want to see what you have in these young guys. And that doesn't mean you have to force them on the opening day roster. It doesn't mean they have to play 150 games to see what they have. But you certainly want to get a look at them more than you don't, and more at the big league level, because no matter what you do at the minor league level, it's completely different once you get to the majors.
So, Mark, none of the infield spots are set except for first base with Andrew Vaughn. Should we expect Colson Montgomery to be playing in the big leagues to start the season, specifically at shortstop, or do you think we're going to have to wait?
It's interesting. I picked him to make the team. I've seen other writers pick him to make the team. Chris Getz was talking at the media day the other day out in Scottsdale, I think it was Scottsdale, about that their goal is to do what's best for him for the whole season. And they're not just looking at opening day. They want to get it right from the beginning, and they want to have him have a good 6-month season. So to me, that kind of, leaned towards he's in the mix, but he's certainly not the front runner. And I think he understands that. I actually just talked to him the other day about that, and he definitely understands. And, he doesn't want anything kind of just bequest to him. He's going to have to go out and earn it. And even if he does, he may, start in Charlotte for a couple weeks, a month, or whatever. But I think it would be interesting to see him up there and let him go. I know there's other managers I've covered who believed in let the young guys play. Let them, even if you're not ready to win, let them come up and play. Let them learn at the big league level. Let them struggle at the big league level. And then when you're ready to contend, they've got that kind of out of their system. And I think Colson learned a lot from his rough year in Charlotte last year. I really do. I think he really, he had never in his life struggled athletically. He was one of the better basketball players during his time in Indiana basketball, which is a religion more than a sport in Indiana high school basketball. He joked with me that in his history class, in Indiana in high school, they made him watch Hoosiers, which tells you a little bit about, what basketball is about there. He was a great baseball player. He was a first-round pick. He had played well in the minors up until last year. So that tells a lot, how you handle the struggles. And he finished strong. He had a good 8-game run in the Arizona Fall League. So I think he's in the mix.
Okay.
I think it's far from a lock, but I think he's in the mix to break camp with the team. And, if he doesn't, that opens up a whole new avenue. And I would say in the infield, besides Vaughn, I think Miguel Vargas, has probably got a pretty good chance at third base or somewhere in the mix. If not third base, then DH.
I was going to say, how intense of a competition is this for guys like Lenyn Sosa and Miguel Vargas as well?
Well, it is. I mean, Vargas and Sosa both are out of options, so that could give them the leg up. And if the team decides we don't want to risk losing them, because you would risk losing them if they aren't added to the opening day roster. I think Sosa is dependent a little bit on what happens in Montgomery. You have Josh Rojas, who can play anywhere and play anywhere well. He hasn't played a lot of shortstop in his career. So, I mean, if Brian Ramos, who's another one in that mix, continues to be dealing with this sore elbow that's kept him from throwing the baseball, I don't know if he makes the team as strictly a DH, or maybe he starts, on the injured list until he gets completely healthy. So if that's the case, you could put Rojas at third. You could put Vargas at DH. Even if you have Colson at short, you still have the second base open, which could be Sosa. Brooks Baldwin also in the mix. So you're right. The infield is a very muddled situation, but in a good way, because they have a lot of guys they like fighting for spots.
I want to talk about the rotation now. We've got Perez, Berg, Martin, Wilson. They round out the rotation at this moment. But how important is it for Jonathan Cannon, Drew Thorpe, and I know Kai Bush, Tommy John surgery, so he'll miss some time.
Right.
But the other young pitchers as well, to get that big league experience for maybe 2 or 3 years later down the road?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think Cannon is a great example. He came to camp last year as a prospect, maybe not as highly touted as some of the other ones, kind of a nondescript, guy in spring training. I remember Lamont Pope and I talked to him after a game in Scottsdale, and he was just kind of wide-eyed that he was being interviewed, it seemed like, at the time. And now, after making, 21 starts last year and pitching pretty well for the White Sox, I think he was 1 out away from a complete game against the Astros at one point during the year. You can see a difference in him. You can see that he knows he belongs. You can see he knows he's going to be in the rotation. He may be the opening day starter on March 27th against the Angels, but he carries himself as kind of a leader after just 1 year experience. And I think what part of that is Garrett Crochet was so good in that clubhouse last year for the younger pitchers, and not just as an example of hard work, as an example of, what hard work can pay off for you. Just you always saw him talking with Cannon and Drew Thorpe and Davis Martin and whoever else was up, just about not just what he threw, but what they were throwing, kind of picking their brain. And I think they all learned from him, which is a tough thing. He's no longer there, but, they got a good return in that. So, yeah, I think it's important, and I think it'll be important if, even if Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith, who are the top 2 left-handed prospects in the game, according to MLB Pipeline, even if they come up and get a couple weeks or a month in the majors, that helps. So it all leads towards the ultimate goal, which may not come until 26 or 27, which is contention for, through this latest rebuild.
Mark, my final question for you before we let you go to head out to dinner there in Arizona. Who are some
That's right.
prospects that people are overlooking that you think could also have a really good chance of making the opening day roster?
I think Chase Madroff has an outside shot. They have they really like the fact that he's got a great approach at the plate. I think he'd be a more utility role. And I think when it comes down to that, then you got to try and figure out, is it better for him to play sporadically at the majors or play every day at Charlotte or Birmingham? So that's a job for Chris Getz and Paul Yanish and everyone else in the front office there. I think the year will start with Corey Lee and Matt Theis behind the plate. Mm-hmm. But Kyle Teo and Edgar Carroll are right there too, 2 of the 6 guys in the top 100. So, it probably not a lot that are kind of forcing their way out in spring training, but you could see quite a few as the season goes along. Mason Adams is a solid pitcher. Eric Adler and Peyton Pillette both could be late inning relievers. Probably won't break with the team, but could help sooner than later with the White Sox.
All right, Merk, I lied to you before we let you go, though. Let me see the
more.
shirt. Is that the McLovin shirt? Is that the dinner attire for tonight?
It is.
Way more chill in Arizona.
I'm sorry I didn't dress up more for the interview.
Well, Scott Merkin from MLB.com, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we'll chat with you again real soon. Enjoy Arizona.
Anytime. Thanks, Tina. Great talking to you.